You're listening to the Ryangle Podcast, starring Ryan Hoger and Ryan Eastwood, and sometimes other people named Ryan. And now, here are some Ryans.
Ryan,
Blab, blab.
there we go.
Hello, finger snap. Well, good afternoon, third Ryan. It's a pleasure to have you aboard.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Good to meet you.
Yeah, you as well.
Yeah, awesome. Shoot. So I guess let's just let's get into it. This is the first guest of the Ryangle podcast, Ryan M, who is a friend of mine here in Chattanooga, and we got to having a conversation about a men's group that he's part of, and we just wanted to have a discussion with him about how that works and how we can have better conversations with each other as men to support each other and just be more emotionally intelligent. So I've really been looking forward to talking with you about this. So yeah, why don't you give us a little whatever intro you want to say about yourself that you feel is relevant, and then tell us about this group that you've been a part of and how's it going?
Okay, so I'm Ryan. I'm in my early 40s at this point. Moved to Chattanooga last year. So like a lot of stuff. So intersection of like getting older, moving to a new city, right? It's like making new friends doesn't get easier as you get older. It doesn't get easier when you move to, starting over and you move to a city instead of working in office and working like remote. So it's like all these different, there are a whole bunch of different factors that sort of push, it made me like think more about this topic of like friendships, how friendships generally and for how far I'm in as they age, right? It's like I know I almost want to jump straight into like how the men's group started and how we started thinking about that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, so like I have a friend that so I lived in the DC metro area up until 2013. Like moved to California, had a friend from the DC metro area, and we had like a regular call that we kept up for, which is a pretty long time for people not living in oftentimes you like lose friendships when you move away. This one we like maintained, and I think we were just looking at like we were having sort of the same feelings and seeing some of the same research that like the quality of your life, especially as you get older, depends heavily on your friendships. It isn't just your mental state, it's like your physical state too. Stuff like blood pressure and weight and like all these things. It's like the quality of your friendships matters a lot. And there's also some research that like men are terrible at this as they get older. And like we were both aware of this. So it's like I think early 2020, we were just talking, we sort of started talking about this and like, what's something we can do about it? And my friend came up with this idea for a men's group. And this is like just before COVID started. So we started thinking about it, like, so it's like, oh, men's group, that's a novel idea. Like, let's do some research. Like, what's out there in men's groups? Like, is there some guidance? Is there a good model to start a men's group? And if you search for a men's group, it's really hard to find something that doesn't meet in like a church basement. Like if you search for like
it's not explicit religious, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of sort of satellite religion there.
Yeah, like if you search for like secular men's group, the only things that were coming up at that time were like, why aren't there any secular men's groups? Is basically what comes up. So there weren't really any, there just weren't a whole lot of great models out there. So like my friend was really like the driving force of like, let's find some like-minded people, get them together and try to figure out how we get this thing started. And of course, COVID hits and then we're all super isolated. And it's like, wow, that's a pretty good reason to start to like really push this forward.
Sure. Yeah. Big impetus. So is it, so then are you doing this as a get together like virtually, or are you guys meeting in person? Okay.
Yeah, it's virtual. So everybody originally met in the DC metro. Some like two people moved to California. Like I'd moved to California. I was in California when this started. Another person from DC was also in the Bay. Bay Area. But yeah, the start is all virtual, and it is still virtual.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you don't have to be in person to make that happen, obviously. Awesome. And so when you were looking for, because I'm glad you brought this up because it's something I was interested in. When you were looking for a model, you didn't find anything, and you guys had to go from scratch, or was there any like literature or examples that you guys had that you went off of?
I mean, I think we conceptually knew the problems that we wanted to solve. So I wouldn't say we really had a good model, but I mean, I think we knew the main hurdle to overcome, and that was that even if we already knew all the people at some level in the group, which we of course were going to, right? It wasn't going to be a bunch of randos. Like there was still this question of like, how do you build closeness with a group? You know, where they like the objective is to build closeness. It's like, where do you? It's like the key question we were trying to answer was like, where do you start? And like that was the thing where I think I was looking for some guidance, but didn't really find anything.
Yeah. So that was because I did make a note here to talk about defining objectives. So that was your defining, focusing objective, was just to build closeness. Is that how did you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'd say I'm trying to think how clearly it was laid out, because like we didn't like record notes for like posterity at the time we were forming this thing. But yeah, it was like, how do you form closer bonds between people? Because like that's the thing that men tend to like drift away from as they get older. So it's like, okay, we're going to like go on a mission to counteract that force.
Yeah, and were you looking to maintain bonds that one would normally think of just like the bonds of friendship, or accomplish something like above and beyond that, or just like a very good intentional friendship? How did you, and I should ask too, were you guys like friends? Like how close were you before you started the group?
I knew two of the people pretty well, and four of the people I'd at least met in passing. But you're talking about like met at like a LAN party. We're not talking about like to date myself.
LAN party, wow!
I miss LAN parties.
I remember those.
Yeah, so like we'd all at least met in passing. The other person who originally came up with the idea, I think, knew all the members of the group pretty well. But between members of the group, I think the remaining, so 7 people to start. And I would say that among people who are not the person who came up with the idea, since he was like the nexus, the other 6 people, I would say, knew 3 people fairly well, and 3 people had like met in passing, was about the level.
Okay, great. So what kind of take me through, like, you guys, how often do you meet?
Every second week. So it started every week, and that's actually an important part of how the group started. It started every week. That's a little too much to maintain. Like every month is not quite often enough. Like every other week seems about right.
Okay. And then how it's kind of take me through when you guys get together, just the mechanics of, you know, what do you have any sort of structure around who talks? What do we talk about? What are we going to cover? How long does this go for? Like, do you guys have any structure around that?
We do. So let me start off with the structure of how this started, because we were super intentional about the structure at the start of this thing. And I'm going to drop a link into the chat. So
oh my goodness, technology.
So if you search for the 36 questions, the first thing that comes up is a New York Times article, the 36 questions that lead to love. Have you heard of this
funny
phenomenon?
I sent that to, we were brainstorming podcast ideas. I sent that to Ryan and I said, just on a lark, we should do these 36 questions between the two of us. That they're the 36 questions. They're the 36 questions to make you fall in love.
Yeah, I did not actually read them. So this is great.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think but the original, even though it's billed as like the 36 questions that lead to love, like I don't think the original research was actually 36 questions to build closeness. Like, even though you can use them in that way, and like I was aware of the 36 questions because like when I was dating, I sort of had them in my head where it's like, I'm going to go straight to the stuff like this, because it's like you want to get to know people, you want to get past this like surface level stuff of like, where are you from and how many siblings you have. Like that doesn't tell you anything about a person.
Sure.
And the questions are but the questions are structured in a way where they kind of ramp, right? Because like you can't go from 0 to 100 in terms of closeness with people. So like that's the thing we tried to get right at the start of the group.
Mhm.
And like the questions were a way to sort of like bridge that gap between like some of us don't know each other as well, and just building comfort and talking about like things that are like more and more serious. Like you've got to start somewhere, and like the questions were like a nice place to start.
Yeah, I was talking with another buddy of mine in preparation for this who has some experience in different men's groups, and he used a word that I'm not terribly like comfortable with other men, but it's intimacy, and I think that's what we're getting at. And it's like,
It is.
yeah,
Yeah,
when
yeah.
we say closeness, you don't think about building in. I only think of my significant other as somebody that I'm generally like intimate with, right? Or maybe very, very small group of people. So the idea of men intentionally building some kind of intimacy with each other, I think it's important to put that fine a point on it and like feel those feelings you feel when you say, oh, intimacy, men, and then deal with that.
Yeah.
Explore maybe why you have this uncomfortable feeling about the idea of intentionally building, intimacy among men.
If I can kind of jump in on that, it's
Yeah.
intimacy is very much a vulnerable closeness too. And it's not, we're definitely taught from a young age that you shouldn't let people inside your guard that you don't already know very well, or people who aren't part of your blood family. So intentionally allowing, and there is an element of risk there, like in order to develop that intimacy, you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and that does mean that you're vulnerable if someone has bad intentions, or even if they just don't actually match up with you in the way that you thought they would. You could get hurt pretty badly in any number of ways. So I mean, there are reasons that you don't just get intimate with just anybody, and not too immediately either.
And maybe the vulnerability to distinguish it from closeness, or that maybe it's why it's important to use that word is you're defining a vulnerability on it. And so then so you guys use these questions as a sort of the initial way to find ways to be vulnerable with each other. And how did that work?
Yes, because I think you're just doing it like Ryan H, to your point, it's just like a little bit at a time, right? Like you don't want to like reveal yourself all at once, or at least for some people it's a lot harder than others. So you want to, I'm going to open up a little bit, and then and then as long as people respond in a way that's like favorable, and they earn a little bit more of your trust, and you can open up a little bit more. And as long as everybody shares that intention, you realize like, hey, these are people who these are people who are like, if I open up or not, are trying to think of the right word here, but like people who are going like, if people respond in like a favorable way and you open up, right, you can sort of build on that to like open up more and more and more to talk about like more and more serious topics.
Sure.
So it's like, yeah.
And how much, so you had some rapport with some of these people more than others. And how long would you say, well, I should say in the time that you've been doing it, how successful do you think you have been at building a closeness with these people? And then how much time did that take?
I think probably about 3 months, 4 months, we got to a pretty good place, but we were meeting like every week at the start where, it's like, but yeah, I'd say until like 3 or 4 months, we were in like a pretty good place. But it's really easy to drift. That's something that we've found. Like you have to maintain the intent, right? It's easy to go back to like surface level conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You really got to,
continually drive it.
Just think of it. But like, that's, you've got to continually drive it. Exactly. Because it's like, how do you usually respond when somebody asks how you're doing?
Oh yeah, good, bro.
Yep.
Right. It's almost like this. It's almost like this reflex, right? It's like we all have the same reflex. You have to, with people who have this intent, you still have to work to get past that reflex to, ask like how are you really doing? So like if I can jump to like how some of the sessions are structured now, like some of them are less structured. Some of them we call them like social. Even the ones that are quote social, there still is some structure. Like we'll start it out with like, we'll go around the room with what's since the last time we met, like what's a high, what's a low, and learning, like something you learned since the last time you left, since the last time we met. And like, it doesn't have to be those three. This is a group that's really into like growth mindset stuff. So that works really well for this group. But like and then we rotate for like other sections. Like at the start of the year, there was like an annual planning, like what type of sessions we want to have, this year. But like we have ones on like group coaching where somebody will bring a problem in their life they want to work through.
Okay.
So we'll have sessions on that where it's focused on one person. We'll have other sessions that have some theme, like where it's like personal finance or money, right? Something that can be really hard to talk about. Sex life, like things of that nature. Like we'll talk about books, books that are like relevant to the group. But like that's generally how we structure the section. So there'll be like one social one that is some sort of like a topic that's like laid out at the start of the year.
Cool. Yeah, those are really good ideas. I'm going to put this the link you dropped with the questions in the show notes, because I think it would be great if one of my goals for this discussion is for if somebody's thinking about this or hadn't thought about it and then decides that this is valuable, to have some idea around how to structure, get things going. And I hadn't thought about some of those ideas that you guys had, like the high, low, all that. That's really cool. And then focusing on somebody that says he need help. One of the challenges that I was talking with a friend of mine who's been part of several of these. One of the challenges he found was men getting very competitive sometimes over like leadership and who's in charge and what the pecking order is. Is that a challenge you've had, or is that maybe something that comes into play in bigger groups or something you think?
No, that isn't really something that's come into play. That's really come into play for us. I mean, if I'm trying to think about why that might be, I mean, part of it is just like the personalities of the people. We're not really trying to like one up each other, but also like some of the topics. If I think about like some of the topics we talk about throughout the year, like the finance topic is led by somebody who's incredibly interested in finance, and the fitness topic is led by somebody who's really, so somebody will like lead the topic in those days, and people pick which topics they want to lead in. So essentially we give different people in the group a chance to lead. So I feel like that might solve part of the problem.
Yeah, where everybody's having a chance to contribute or lead, and it's very like well distributed democratically. Have you had any other I don't know, challenges, road bumps, like things that somebody who's starting a group like that might look out for?
I guess so. So the first thing is like we made the group opt out rather than opt in, and I think that was really important. And that was I think the reason that I was able to maintain this friendship with this person like across coast, because it was like an opt out thing. It's like me and this friend had a call that was scheduled for the same night every single month. It's like the third Thursday of the month.
You're going to be there unless you have a damn good reason not to be.
Right.
That's the default assumption, right?
Yeah, and it was the same way with like the men's group, where we had this, where we all agreed that if you want to be a part of this thing, it's Thursdays at 8 Eastern Standard, and you're showing up. And if you can't make that commitment, then this group is not.
Yeah, it's not for you.
It's not for you.
Yeah.
And like we started out with 7, and like somebody bounced like immediately, almost immediately, and that's fine. Like it wasn't like there's no judgment. It just wasn't right for that person at that point in their life, and that's fine. But like it wouldn't shock me if that happens, but just like be okay with that happening. Like
there was I moved to the Pacific Northwest fairly recently, and I'm really interested in what you were saying there about your primary goal here being fostering friendship where there was not friendships before. And so I moved to the Pacific Northwest fairly recently, and I have a wife and kids myself, so I have my nuclear social group that I'm with 24 hours a day when I'm home. But I also have a desire for that friendship, like you said, that I'd be interested in circling back to what you were saying about the health aspects and everything else, but not what I'm keying at right now. And my immediate thought was to look for groups based on mutual interests and sort of develop a friend group that way, you know. And I don't know if it's the nature of the interests that I have, but I've noticed it hasn't really been working out very well. Like two of the things I've sort of been interested are like historical swordsmanship, fencing, and then raving. Like those are two things that I've
Yeah.
always been into. And I'm like, well, hey, let's find those people here. And I found a historical swordsmanship group pretty quickly. And I found some ravers pretty quickly. But I guess the friendship aspect of it has been sort of shallow and unsatisfying. On the swordsmanship side, I've gotten a lot of that sort of competitive behavior where
Yeah.
there's a few people who tend to take it over, not in a malicious way, but they're the ones that do it for, 6 hours a day. And I don't do that. Don't do that. And I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
And then skill wise, they run past you so far that it's like, well, I'm not really competing anymore. I'm not really having fun. I'm just getting my ass kicked now. And then
That was me with jujitsu. I'm paying money to I'm paying money to just get twisted at a pretzel by strangers.
like, I guess there's a learning aspect, but I'm not making any friends. And then, I mean, I guess ravers have the problem that the problems that you would imagine with ravers. They tend to be flaky and either want to be hype beasts or just be high all the time. So I guess that's probably interest specific there. But I guess I'm curious what your thoughts would be on that, like interest driven groups versus more what you're talking about of a purely friendship and sort of a soul bearing group.
Yeah, that's a good term. It's an interesting term. One of the one of the things where that I've read about and I think is like manifested in if I think about like what types of events historically I've done with men, and I think of men as doing, and then like I'm married and I think about like what types of events like my wife does with her friends, and what is like a stereotypically male thing to do together, like go to a football game or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a stereotypical thing for women to do is like get together and talk. So there's this difference between like facing each other or like facing the same direction. You're all facing the same direction versus like you're facing the other people. So I mean, if you're talking about like an activity, or even I guess if you're playing cards, you're technically maybe facing each other, sort of. But the focus is not on like socializing. So if there's like an interest, the way I would think about this is like the group would give you a chance to meet people, but you still have to have that time probably outside of the activity when you're not focused on swordsmanship or something where you can just talk.
Yeah. We used to, do you remember being a kid and you used to just hang out? Like,
yes.
I can't remember the last time that I was
like,
hey man, just come over. Well, there was no plan other than to just be around each other for a period of time. And I don't know that I've done that, but twice in my entire adult life.
We did that when we came up with this podcast. Came over to your house. I hung out for a couple of days. We drank and shit, but that wasn't, we didn't have a particular goal, and it worked out really well. Of course, there's the other thing too, the people that I'm still really close with and have like long conversations with are also guys I met in high school. So
yeah, that's almost my entire like super nuclear friend group as well. So you're talking about the type of things that women, tend to do when they get together versus men. I think a lot of people, they hear about a men's group right off the bat, the question is going to be, well, does this, if I'm trying to build intimacy and friendships, does this need to be all male? Can it be co-ed? And then what do you think the differences are? What is gained or can be gained from only having, men in a group versus having it co-ed? Why draw that line?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I don't know that it has to be all male. I mean, at the time we were at the, as I mentioned earlier, at the time we were talking about starting this group, like there are problems that are like unique to men. Like men tend to just be worse at forming and like maintaining friendships. So I think there was a special need there, but there's no reason it has to be like a men's group.
It's a special needs group.
Special. I guess like the question that I would, I guess the question, I guess like the part that I think about is like, what topics would you add and would you remove if it was a mixed gender group? Because I feel like people. Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Finish that.
Yeah, I just like if people are talking about things where they like would somebody come out with a thing they screwed up in their marriage if it was a mixed gender group?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's less likely.
Yeah, I think there's a topical element there that's definitely relevant.
Yeah.
There's also I remember seeing an article about a study a little while ago that was men, when they get together and drink, build intimacy, but not when there's even one female there. That there was something that they found that dynamic changes, and that intuitively made a lot of sense to me. I think that there is some, and this might not be true of all men, I don't know, but I think it's some subroutine that's going on in all of our brains at some point. I think it's some deep monkey shit that if there's a female there, that there's competition, or you're trying to gain, there's competition for attention. There's something changes in your brain if there's a woman there that makes you shittier at being at building intimacy with the other men, or dropping your boundaries, or I think there's some kind of posturing that's going on, maybe.
Yeah, you cannot underestimate the pheromones.
Yeah, that definitely feels right. I feel like there's something about dropping your guard that it's just going to be harder.
Yeah, like you don't want to, maybe even if it's on a total subconscious level, you might not want to say something or do something that puts you in a position of being like moving down the social hierarchy a little bit, like being lesser than.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's just thinking about that. I think it's intriguing that could turn into a very positive sort of way to build camaraderie and intimacy, as we refer to. And also, I think it just as easily turn profoundly negative, like the infamous "grab them by the pussy" comments, or
God,
in a entirely male atmosphere. So I guess just with that, I'm kind of seeing two very different directions that sort of all male environment can go.
Yeah, well,
it depends. Sorry,
I
Ryan.
mean,
Go on.
It's okay, Ryan.
No problem, Ryan. I see what you're saying, Hoger. That sometimes in all male environment, everybody's getting. Maybe the default mode is to get a little bit toxic and establish what the pecking order is. You think about the first thing we do is, what do you do for work? And then you're sort of subconsciously ranking people, like where do they fit.
It's true.
And maybe that's like the default mode, and that having a group like this would be to intentionally not get into that kind of toxic default mode. Like, let's just, in its ideal to me, it would be, let's just drop all the pretense of like any kind of ranking, hierarchy, social status sort of thing, and just be like, we're all humans, and drop that and see each other as equals and see how we can benefit each other. So that might be the point. I see what you're saying about it keep defaulting into some kind of a toxic thing with all men group, but yeah, that might be the entire point of why you would want to intentionally do something like this.
Yeah, and it feels like it's just sort of why have a variety of people in the group if you're not going to respect? I mean, there's a benefit from people coming from a different set of backgrounds, and if you're just going to try to sort yourself out into a pecking order, it's sort of like defeating the purpose of having all the all these different people in the group.
Yeah, and what is the background, like the diversity of the backgrounds from the guys that are in the group that you're a part of? Is it pretty diverse, or is everybody kind of doing similar stuff in tech like you're doing?
No, actually, there are two. There are people who work for the people work for the government. There are some people involved in tech. It isn't super. Age range is like it's like 8-year spread, age range wise. Some people have kids, some people are married, some people aren't. So there's a little bit of a spread there, but it is not a super diverse group.
Let me
Hold on, let me just
pause for a sip of tea 1 second, because Zoom just told me that I need to
I was
upgrade
just
an
about to
account.
mention
This
that.
is going to continue, which is not a
I
problem
was
we've
just
had.
mentioning.
Is that just for multiple members?
It says we have 9 minutes and 22 seconds remaining, which I was just about to mention. Speedrun men's group, go.
Go.
I did. Yeah, we've only been doing the meetings between the two of us. So I guess if you're going to do multiple and record and stuff, they want your money, which I will happily give them in 1 second.
Stand by.
Hour? I thought it was an hour if it was 2 people. So I guess this is 40 minutes. They just take 100. They take 120 and just divide by the number of people apparently, and that's the length of
We've gone well over an hour though. We've gone for a good hour and a half, hour and 45 on some of these. We like to talk.
Or sign in with Google.
So
how many licenses do you need? This one.
Kind of as an aside while Ryan is figuring this out. Ryan. So one of the things we discussed in our early episodes was sort of the midlife crisis and the things happening around this age for us. You've crossed the big 4-0 there. I believe Ryan and I are both 38. Just as a complete departure from what we're talking about. Any thoughts on sort of before and after? Does it make that much of a difference, or
no? It doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference at all.
Just older 38.
Yeah, I totally got the midlife crisis out of the way when I was like 28.
I keep having them. I get them every couple of years. So
no, I don't think anything. I don't think. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like what causes that? Like, what's the? I think the thing you discussed. So I think I saw the episode, and it's this like, seeing your youth in like the rearview mirror or something. I guess would be a trigger.
Oh, unlimited minutes! Wow,
we've been upgraded.
All they wanted was money. That's all I had to give them. They just let you do whatever you want. It's crazy. Yeah, I have to whiz like a racehorse. I will be right back.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but I just haven't had those. I haven't had those feelings or whatever. I mean, it's. Yeah, it's a little. I'm not quite sure what. I think there was something related to like the career change I did when I was like 32, 33. Where like I think if your life was like life's had these different phases that it's gone in, and I feel like that's somehow like affected like my perception of. Okay, I know what it is. Sorry, this is not a great way to walk through this, but when I moved to California in 2013, I joined a startup out there, and so I'm 30. I just turned 33, and I was like one of the oldest people at the startup, which is weird.
Yeah.
But I don't know, something about going to Silicon Valley and then like there was just a lot of I guess feelings to unpack there, where it was like Silicon Valley has this very like Logan's Run feeling where like everything's graded on like an age curve, where it's the Forbes 30 under 30, and people are CEOs when they're 23. Mm-hmm. And it was a really scary thing getting there and being like, holy shit, I'm 33 and I just left management consulting. I basically like halved my salary, moved out to a more expensive place, starting over with friends, starting over my career. And I'm one of the oldest people here. Holy shit, is this going to be okay? Like I'm basically spotting everybody 10 years, like a head start in tech, like head start in all this stuff. So that was a ton to unpack when I moved to California. But I sort of had to get over the age thing, probably like a little bit younger than most people. I think due to that change in career.
Yeah, that's crazy to me because there is kind of I've lived in or around the Bay Area for a good portion of my life, most of it. But I haven't actually worked in tech ever. And you kind of hear the stereotype that it's all like, 23-year-olds, 25-year-olds. But then with my personal experience with that, in every industry I've worked in, you've got the guys who've been doing it for 30 years, and they're the ones that really know their way around everything, and nothing can really operate without them. Are those guys just not there?
No. Actually, so it's I guess it's a couple things. Like, so at the small, like the sort of small, scrappy companies, they tend to bias a lot younger. And the reason, I think part of the reason for that is because they can't afford those people. Those people who have experience.
Gotcha.
Like,
that makes sense.
Those people have families and bills to pay. Like,
Yeah.
like they don't want to eat ramen and live in a 1-bedroom, or they
Yeah,
can't.
they're not going to do it.
Right. Like they're just not going to do it. So, I guess the sort of way that I came to terms with it, or sort of made peace, was like, all that experience I had leading up to it that was outside of tech was actually a huge benefit coming into tech. Because, like, if I'm going to directly compare Washington, D.C. to Silicon Valley like puts too high of a premium on energy. And then like DC values like your background. It's like DC is like years of experience is like way overvalued, and energy in Silicon Valley is like given too much value. And like the right mix is like somewhere in the middle.
Okay, so that's how you end up with everybody in our government's about 80 plus years old, and everybody in Silicon Valley's 30 or less.
Yeah, but it's also like so the company that the company that I joined in 2013 was really small, and as it grew over the years, and now it's gone public, the age has increased much faster than the company has aged. Mm-hmm. Because you actually find product market fit, you actually build a real business. At some point you need people who actually know what they're doing. Like, you can't just make things up as you go. So like, I think what happens is, like, those smaller companies, yeah, it's like people straight out of school who have like nothing to lose, and there's like a lot of that. There's a lot more of that, not exclusively, but people starting new companies. But as companies grow up, they tend to hire those people who actually like have been around, like have like if you're going public, you don't hire a you don't promote somebody who just finished college to be like your you're a CFO, right? You hire somebody who knows how to be a CFO if you're going to be a public company. You don't just, like, there's some things you can't just fake.
Get a college student to figure it out as they
go. You eventually reach a point where you can't just figure things out as you're going. Like, the stakes are too high.
Sure. So yeah, Hoger, you were talking about the middle age and sort of harkening back to episode 1 and the impetus for this. I just wanted to touch on that the podcast itself came out of, Hoger visiting me out here and us having some really good discussions, and sort of both discovering, much to our surprise, that a lot of the things that we were thinking about and struggling with in private were common to both of us. And we said, oh, this is a good thing. Maybe we should formalize this in some way and keep this going. So I think this is like the intentional male intimacy that you guys are building is something that we just recognize, like, oh, what is this? I could use more of this in my life. And it's turned into, and maybe that could be useful to somebody else, was the idea of doing a podcast with it. And so that's kind of become what, the two of us, this is our sort of men's group, though I'm very interested in getting a larger, one going, but we definitely wanted to model good, male, emotionally intelligent conversation, because it's not something that we've been coached on, encouraged to do, and hopefully we're one of the first generations that kind of overcomes the past generations of trauma and figures our shit out. I was curious, another thing that another reason these groups tend to form, you're mentioning church, and I used to be a churchgoer, and I've been part of groups like that and miss it tremendously. Like, When I was in high school, me and some friends started a group in my parents' house, and we just called it the group, I think. And it was a group of people getting together every week and just being like, how the actual hell are you? Is there anything going on? Like, are you struggling? And when you're a teenager, God, you're struggling with so much stuff. And just a group of adults getting together and saying, how can we be better people for ourselves and for each other, is something that I think is entirely missing in the secular world, and the secular world doesn't know how to do. The recovery and addiction world has a model for this.
Yeah, they do.
And so I was wondering if either of you guys have any experience with therapy. Like, this is something I've only dabbled in recently in my life, but with what the role of a group like this would be, like what you're getting out of maybe therapy that you couldn't get out of a group like this, and vice versa. Have either of you guys done any kind of personal couples therapy, anything like that?
Therapy, yes, just for me. Ryan H?
Yeah, I've done some. There's definitely a more fixed dynamic. It was helpful, you know. Yep. Towards the end of university days, I have bouts of being fairly depressed, though I think it's probably had most to do with actual situations of being completely broke and not accomplishing what I want. That's kind of my takeaway since the last couple of years of actually accomplishing my goals. It hasn't really been an issue.
So,
but yeah, I saw some therapy for that.
Yeah. So Ryan M., since you have a experience with both there, what would you say the roles of those two things in your life? Are there any like overlap there, or are they very distinctly different things?
No, there is some. So I can go back to a point that you made heading into this topic, that part of what you get out of a group of friends is that, like, and I gathered from the first episode that, like, you two found out that you're experiencing the same things. So, like, it can feel really lonely, you know, if you're just like, man, I'm struggling with this thing all by myself. And there's something really powerful about finding that, hey, everybody else is feeling these same things, and you're just not alone in like the same way that you were. And like, that doesn't come from therapy.
That makes sense. That's not going to come out of therapy.
It's not.
In fact, I saw it. It was my first time ever doing it. Was like tele therapy. During my last relationship was terrible, and in some senses abusive towards me in certain instances. And it was just one of these things where I had just gotten my head completely upside down. I didn't know which way was up, and felt like I was in a deep dark hole with nobody knew that I was in this situation, as far as I'm aware. And I sought a therapist just to have somebody look me in the eye and be like, wow, that sounds like a hard thing. Like, that's all that after a couple of years of being in this terribly emotionally difficult situation, I just needed somebody to, and if I had been part of a group where I felt I could share some of these things with, hopefully it wouldn't have gotten to as stupid a place as it did, where I let somebody just roll over my boundaries for as long as I did. But I also wouldn't have felt that, that feeling of being totally alone. And so what sorts of struggles are men, like, of course, don't get any, specifics any more than you feel comfortable, and we're not mentioning anybody's names here, but what sorts of things are people sharing that they find helpful to deal with, or that they had felt alone previously and are getting some companionship out of the group?
If I just try to sum up some different topics into a common theme, like, a lot of people feel stuck. There are a lot of people who feel stuck in some way. So it's like, how do you get somebody unstuck? Where, like, I'm not handling my finances well, and I'm embarrassed, and I'm scared, or like, I'm not taking care of my body, and I have a kid. Like, what do I do about this? Mm-hmm. So a lot of it's like, people just find themselves in some rut, or they have some project they're trying to work on, they're not making any progress, like, they're not motivated. So it's really easy to get stuck in ruts, right? Because, like, we'll have so much going on. Like, by the time you're in your late 30s, early 40s, you've probably got a relationship, you've got a job you're into, like, in a fairly serious way. So it's really easy to get stuck. So I feel like a lot of the topics are like in that realm of like, there's some part of my life, whether it's finances or like physical health or, trying to think of some other recent ones.
Yeah, a friend of mine described it as sort of crowdsourcing solutions to
Yeah.
problems. Yeah, so I can see it being valuable in both those ways. In the way that where you just, because one of the first things you have to do with dealing with a problem, I guess it's fairly obvious, but like finances is one of these where it's just embarrassing, right? And you need to get, this can probably help you. Being able to be vulnerable with other people just gets you over that hump. Or I imagine the same thing, if you have a weight problem or something like that, where you're just putting the thing over here, not looking at it, and that is itself perpetuating the problem.
The other thing that I think happens, and I'm thinking about how this has gone over the course of the group, is that there's also a skill of naming the problem. And that also comes out of like meeting with the group, where it's like a lot of these things, something's wrong, but you can't name it. So there's like help from the group in actually naming the actual problem, because a lot of times you'll have some symptom, and it takes some time to get to the actual root cause. And again, like the finance thing, it's easy to say like, okay, like I'm, like maybe you're not dealing with it because you're embarrassed. You're not dealing with it because you don't know, because you don't know, or whatever, right? But it's like actually getting to the root of the problem, and part of the group, part of like being able to talk these problems out with the group is actually building that skill of actually being able to name the issue.
Yeah. What sorts of issues do you find difficult to name? Just sort of like general emotion, like general dissatisfaction with one's life, and like you can't figure out exactly why, that sort of thing?
Well, I know somebody who's writing a paper, but they haven't made a whole lot of progress. They hadn't made a whole lot of progress actually unpacking like what are the behaviors this person, like what are the behaviors they've fallen into that are preventing them from doing it. And then like if you go a step deeper, like there's some sort of like feelings like behind that, right? Like people generally behave in a way where they're trying, the way that we behave isn't just random, right? Like there's oftentimes something that like there's like something in your past that you haven't brought to the surface, or something as you said, whether it's finance or something else, something that I'm embarrassed to talk about. And it's like getting to that point of actually understanding like what is that thing, or if you want to change the behavior, like what is the actual set of steps you have to take to change the default.
Yeah, changing your default. That's actually a great, just self-awareness through that is strangely, there's something going on there that's almost like I know a lot of ancient cultures ascribe magical powers to words, but it almost feels that way. Like as soon as I have a word for this thing that I'm dealing with, I can almost like, now I can look at it, now I can put it in a box and turn it over and analyze it and try to deal with the situation. Yes. So that is really powerful. Yeah, I know that's been true with figuring out like, I have adult ADHD, and now that I have a name for that, and other people have studied this, I can start to figure out exactly, I don't just have chronic procrastination as my, thing. There's actually neurological reasons for this, and I can look into that. So, yeah, that's been helpful for me. And then, so moving forward, if somebody wanted to start a group like this, is there a max group size that you feel is useful?
I thought 7 was a lot. 7 was okay, but like 12 is the wrong number. At least if you want to give everybody a chance to talk, and actually, everybody a chance to have, access to group coaching, everybody get a chance to talk, like just having a session, like going like a social session, and just like going around the room. And if somebody has people have some real things they want to unpack, like you're not going to do that with 10 or 12 people.
Sure.
So like 6 feels like, the number we have right now, 6 feels about right for us. again, it's like 7 was fine for the brief period of time we had it. I wouldn't go to, 12 is definitely too many.
Okay. And how do you go about, how recent is the most recent member in the group? Are you guys open to bringing new people in?
Question.
And then
That's
how
a
do
great
you
question.
onboard people?
We haven't onboarded anybody yet. We've talked about it. We haven't done it yet.
Okay.
And that's a really interesting thing. And yeah, we've talked about like that's a problem we have not solved.
Okay.
Yet. And we should have done it at the outset of the group, and we didn't. But it's like, is it unanimous consent? Is it a majority? And then how do you do the onboarding? Because like the 6 of us are really close and can talk about anything, and then you just throw the person into the deep end, you ease them in. Like, so we actually started to have that conversation because somebody did raise the issue of adding a member. And it's also weird because let's say 2 people, let's say that 7 is the cap. And 3 people are like, can I add my friend? Like, do you roll dice? Like, what do you? So we have not solved that problem.
Yeah, I think we just discovered how like Christian sects were made.
It's not like you can catch people up either. Like, even if you wanted to, you literally couldn't catch people up with what you've previously talked about. It would be at least as much time as you already took talking about it the first time.
Gosh, and that, that highlights a macro issue that we were talking about of how difficult it is to build friendships. I think Ryan Hoger, like we're high school friends, and the people that I'm closest with are still friends from high school. So is that a failure of my ability to build relationships as I get older? Is it just like you said, you just can't catch people up? You just can't make new old friends, I suppose.
Well, like, how do you create? I mean, I guess the thing is like, how can you? It gets harder and harder, I think, to recreate an experience where it's where you're thrown together with people and it's really intense. Like, it is possible to do it, but like, how do you create that like boot? How do you create that like boot camp type of environment? So like in like high school, you've got time, right? But I think you can do it if you can somehow have like a boot campish type of experience where you're all thrown into something together. But obviously, like, it's harder as you get older.
Yeah, I guess people try to create that through these, I don't know, like again, church groups, they'll all go camping, they'll all go do something like that. And I think there's value definitely in getting a bunch of guys out into the woods with some beers around a campfire and shooting the shit. But it's not quite what you're talking about. But it seems like the group in and of itself, that journey of figuring out what are we doing here, and learning to be vulnerable about some of your issues and work through those and help other people work through their stuff, is that feels like its own kind of boot campy experience to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think that's part of why the 1 week cadence, right, is pretty intense. We're reading it for like 2 hours, like once a week. That's a massive commitment, right? Obviously, we couldn't sustain that for forever, but we did it for like a few months. And like that is pretty intense, and it's also fairly intense where you don't know some of the people, and you're like, okay, I'm going to talk about this thing, and just it's scary, and just sort of like getting over that with like the group of people is a sort of like boot campy experience in a way.
Yeah,
this might be a little bit Ryan and me centric, but another example of situation that for some reason doesn't turn into what we're talking about is Ryan and I are both deep sea sailors, and you have the same 10 guys. It's all guys on your boat too, right?
Yeah, one female cook, but that's it.
Maybe comes and goes. Yeah. But then you got these same 10 guys that are together for a month at a time, living, eating, and sleeping together. And I think it's kind of interesting because on one hand, you do have this sort of intense camaraderie, borderlining like close friendship that develops. But then on the other hand, you don't, at least in my experience. And I think it probably is the missing that like vulnerable conversation. Like, you're together working towards the same goals 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for half the year. But I guess maybe it kind of also overlaps what we're talking about with interest group, where you're kind of all focused on, you're all facing the same direction. You're not really facing each other. The closest thing is you have 4-hour watches where you kind of don't really have anything to do but shoot the shit. And like, in one sense, I get close with people, but on the other hand, I don't think there's certainly some people I would invite over, but there's nobody that I've met sailing that I would consider close. They're all just workmates. I don't know, Ryan, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it might be different, and maybe Ryan M can speak to this, but I've been in the military and now this, so very, very structured, hierarchical workplaces, which I know is not the norm anymore. Things are getting flatter and flatter. But there's always a sense of there needs to be some boundaries here, because this is work, and you're just not. I know people that have formed very close relationships working on the boats with each other. I have not personally. And then in the military, they talk about that camaraderie, and you do get that, but. And I know some people form very close relationships out of it, but you're not going to tend to form relationships with people like too higher ranking or lesser ranking than yourself, like that, like your strata, like we were on the beach at Normandy sort of thing. And maybe, and I think that changes as you get out and you don't care about those rank structures anymore, and you go shoot the shit with some guy at the VFW and have a beer. But I have to imagine that in most workplaces, they're certainly not conducive to fostering any kind of, those sorts of intimate relationships. That seems like something to me you'd have to take out. Like I get along really well with the captain on my previous boat. And now that he's not my captain, I'm going to feel free to call him up on the phone and maybe form a much more comfortable relationship with the guy. But I wouldn't have done that if he was my if he could fire me, basically. You're in that position. I don't know, Ryan, how have you thought about this with your with work? Have you ever gotten a good friendships out of work, or do you feel that that's conducive?
No, I have. I'm trying to think about this. So the first job I had out of school was a 24-hour rotating shift situation, where it was I guess similar to your job, at least in the sense of it's a small group of people. The work's very intense. You're working weird ass hours. You only effectively see those people. And it was quite a bit like what you described, where there was most of the people, there was not as much of a pyramid structure. There's you've got a shift lead, and then a director of mission above them, and then the government guy above them. But it's you definitely went out. I feel like I formed a lot of friendships with the people who were at the same level as me. And you definitely never invited the director of mission to have a beer with you ever. You never talked to those guys. It was people at your level and not anybody else.
Sure.
But I don't know. I'm not entirely sure how to explain that, because the job was very, very time and grade. So there wasn't a whole lot of competing to get to the next level. Your peers weren't people you were going to fight over the next job for. Everybody sort of understood it was a job you do for a couple of years and you'd probably move on to something else. So there wasn't that pressure of I'm trying to edge out somebody for these limited roles.
Yeah, I've never been in one of those types of work environments, but I think I would despise it. The idea that a work environment where you're constantly worrying about the politics of who's going to move up here and how can I edge this person out, and gets extremely competitive. But yeah, that's another reason that maybe the workplace isn't the sort of place to form more intimate relationships with people.
Yeah, I mean, I have some really close friends in my current job, but they're people I never work with. They're people I physically met in the building, at least when I was out there, but they're people whom I never cross over with on projects.
I didn't want to let you go before we talked about our significant others, and part of the reason for doing this, to my mind, would be to take some of the pressure off your SO.
That's a good way to think about it.
Right, because we do have we have a notion of in America. Esther Perel, the famous therapist, she talks about this a lot, of just especially in current American context, how much pressure we put on that one relationship. You have to be my financial partner, you have to sexually satisfy me, I have to get all my friendship from you, we have to enjoy doing the same shit together, blah 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 blah, and we stack it all on one person, and invariably some part of that falls apart. And this has been my experience as an adult man, is my only intimate, like truly intimate, emotionally intimate relationship that I have is just with my significant other. So if that's not going well, the rest of my life is fucked up. Women are way better at this. And this is one of the things that got me thinking about it.
Yeah.
They like, I don't feel that pressure from any woman that I've been close to or lived with, because they have their group of female friends that they go and take care of their shit with. So I wonder if how has being part of this group affected in a positive way or your relationship with your significant other, and does it take some of the pressure off of her? And then how has anything changed about how that relationship works in your life?
I mean, I wish I had a better answer than no. It hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, it's not an amazing,
Fair enough.
not an
No is
amazing
a
answer.
complete
I mean,
sentence.
no is a complete sentence. Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been. I mean, between having a therapist and having the group, it definitely takes some pressure off. I've had therapists at various points before I had this group, and I think that's something that helps take some pressure off.
Okay. Yeah.
Where I don't know, going back to the therapist thing, it's like I can talk about the same issue every week if I want to, because I'm paying. It's like I'm paying you $200 an hour. I'm going to talk about exactly what I want to talk about. I don't care if you're hearing it for the 8th time. If I need to talk about it, So I feel like that's like as much a valve as the men's group.
Yeah, a valve. That's one of the things that Ryan H. and I had talked about eventually with starting this thing. Is we went, oh cool, we can like rant in the ear of our significant other less. we'll just table that and save it for the time that we're chatting together. Yeah. And my girlfriend, I think, very wisely pushes me into things. So she's like, go play D&D with those guys. Go do, which I did that for the first time the other day. And that's a thing that nerdy men get together and do.
That's the thing.
And that has its own. So really, just to touch on that really quick, that has its own utility, I think, in that we didn't even ask. Like, I got introduced to this group of guys and we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. And nobody asked, what do you do for work? It was just like, hi, this is my name. I'm playing character so-and-so. And it's a different form of like release that you get from just hiding behind some mask and just playing with other adult men in some way. And having I know no personal details about these people, but there's a sort of closeness that comes from just saying, we don't have to worry about any of that, who you are as a real person, sort of thing. And so Ryan M, have you, I know, so Ryan, I should say how we met. Ryan M reached out to me on Reddit, and I've met quite a few people, actually. Pretty much everybody I'm hanging out with Chattanooga now met through Reddit somewhere or another, that we got together and hooked up with. Have those efforts to make friends through Reddit been fruitful?
Some more than others, but like I'd say on the whole, it's been pretty fruitful. There's something about the type of person who would think, I'll find a subreddit to meet people in the new city. There's you at least have people of a similar mind in a really important way there.
That itself was a big step for me, actually. I had one time in my life where I went through a bad breakup. I was in the Marines, and I realized, like, oh, I've just had my head wrapped around this relationship entirely, and I don't have any friends. And I literally went to another guy, and I was like, hey, do you want to hang out sometime? Do you want to be friends? Like, taking that step, I don't know why that feels awkward or unnatural, but I think there's a vulnerability just in reaching out to somebody and saying, hey,
there is.
There is.
Yeah. So I appreciate you doing that, Ryan.
And I would just since we kind of jumped away from it, I think that's it. What you were saying about Dungeons and Dragons was really interesting there too. Just I think that's intriguing that I just realized that I've played Dungeons and Dragons as long as I can remember, like since I was a very small child. But I don't think I've ever actually played with another group of adults.
What do you play with children now? What are you talking about?
I play with my kids. That's my most my most like regular game now. I'm literally Dungeon Master. Yes, asshole. Yes. Yeah, it's a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old and my wife. That's my usual group. But I'm looking back and I'm like, I used to play with groups when I was a teenager, and I don't know if I've managed to get like a group of. I don't know if I've done it. So
Well,
that's an interesting
you
one.
know what it's doing now that I think about it? The closest analog to it is something I got into in DC, Ryan, was the Hash House Harriers. You ever heard of these guys?
I know what a hash
no,
is, like the.
So this is a this is a worldwide group of people that are run and you drink. They call themselves a drinking club with a running problem. And it's got all this history that started in the U.S. Navy, I think in the 60s on some island, and now it's like literally the world over. You can go to any city in the world and there's a kennel of people that are hashing, and there's a person in front that lays a trail with a bag of flour on the ground, and you follow them, and there's all these rules, and it's this whole ridiculous club. And then at the end, there's somebody that leads a circle, and you call people out for doing stupid shit. You make fun of them, and you make them drink and everything. So I was with these people in Washington D.C., and these people work at like the State Department or NASA. But all I know is this woman's name's Cum Dumpster. Like I have no idea what her actual name is in real life, right? And I would know all these like really intelligent, interesting human beings, but on this and I think what that's doing, what's happening with the Dungeons and Dragons, what's happening there, and why I didn't know anybody's real name outside of that group for the most part, is you're almost having a shortcut to intimacy by saying like, okay, you're going to know nothing about me that's vulnerable at all. We all have a little bit of a mask on, and through that mask, we can actually play and interact and act like old friends in strange ways. So instead of facing the problem head on, you're just like, let's put that entire aspect of humanity that's awkward completely over to the side.
I think I hate to use it as an example because I think it's more boring than it gets used as, but I think that's a lot of the appeal of the of Burning Man as well. Just such a departure from your everyday life.
Oh, that you can just be completely anonymous.
Yeah, and
Totally
it's also
different.
totally flat, right? It's like there is no pecking order, right? It's just totally flattens out the entire world, like at least for that brief period of time.
Yeah, for that brief period of time.
For that brief period of time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think obviously things like Burning Man are incredibly popular. And that, yeah, just stepping out of your defined roles just for a fucking minute, just so that we can all breathe for a second. Really refreshing. That's interesting, the Burning Man thing.
Honestly, it's probably has a lot of overlap with just getting fucking blackout drunk as far as the stepping out of your general roles.
Yeah, no, I think what do guys do when they get together? We drink, right? And maybe that is another shortcut to, well, and this is true if you're trying to get somebody in bed. Drinking is a shortcut to intimacy of one way or another. If we just do this, then we don't have to do any of the work because our frontal lobes are turned off.
And you get some stories too. Oh yeah, you remember that time you walked into a fucking car, rear view mirror, and had to get 11 stitches, and we had to drag you to the ambulance. Like, I mean, that's legitimately a story.
Stories.
It's just that not everyone remembers it.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're doing is like the default mode is to shortcut the kind of work that you're doing in the men's group, where you're saying, no, this thing that we're normally avoiding by drinking, or that we're normally avoiding through isolation, or that we're putting on the side, we're just like,
we're just gonna hit it head on.
I got one. When you're hammered, you're allowed to make mistakes because everybody knows you're drunk. In normal male society, you're not allowed to make mistakes like that. You really fucked up if you just run into the rearview mirror.
Oh. You're allowed to fuck up. No, that's yeah. And, I like it.
I'm glad you like it.
And because what we're doing the rest of the time is we're curating the front end. You know, we got, I guess you got that in web development. You've got front end and back end. Oh yeah, during the worst times of my life, my Instagram looked really nice.
Everything's great, guys.
Yeah, I broke up with my last girlfriend, and people were like, you guys look like you were having a great time. I'm like, I know. It's just we're all our own publicists, and it's all fucking lies for the most part.
I mean, not to belabor that story too much, but we were close at that point. I had no idea. had no idea that you were in
Yeah.
that kind of situation.
I imagine that's pretty common. Probably keeping like addiction issues to yourself is pretty common. Financial issues, just any kind of like vice is probably something that people tend to keep on their wraps. Well, thanks for giving us an hour of your time, Ryan. I'm becoming conscious of your time here. Is there anything that you'd like to wrap up on in terms of encouraging people to start a group like you've got going on, or what somebody would do to start that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a powerful force in my life. I'd recommend other people to give it a shot. But as long as you can find like-minded people who are willing to try.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged that more and more people, just in my own small circle, seem to be addressing the issue of like male loneliness and the need for men to have close relationships with other people. And maybe there's a financial interest in it, that BetterHelp and those types of people are blasting ads for it's okay to say you go to therapy, and all over the place, and that's having some kind of effect in the social zeitgeist. But I'm glad that we're thinking about this. Well, Ryan, I appreciate you both very much. And Ryan,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, brother.
Great.
Really appreciate it so much. I'll let you know it's posted, and I will hit you up when I am back in Chattanooga in a few weeks.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Good to meet you, Ryan.
Good
Thanks
meeting
for
you,
coming
Ryan.
on.
So,
bye.
Yeah, just a kind of a
just
final
us.
thought there with what you were saying about the advertisements and whatnot. I've been seeing them lately on the old Facebook feed, that are kind of the extremely stereotypical top knotted man being hugged by another man, and perhaps gently banging a gong while crying, and which is such a tired stereotype as to make me slightly nauseous to see it.
But banging a gong while crying, like what?
Have you not
on?
seen the men's retreat, like where you can get in touch with your inner child and be vulnerable to other men, and like maybe learn to play the bongos.
It's an ad to go to a thing like this.
Yeah, maybe learn to play the bongos, get in touch with your inner child. Which at one point I was way into, like I can play the bongos.
And so,
but I was into it when I was like 17, and now that I'm older, I'm like, that's a big money scam.
Who's advertising to you? Like people that you're going to buy a ticket and go to a thing and meet a bunch of strangers? That sounds like a nightmare.
And then be vulnerable to them. And it's funny because I used to think that maybe one day I would like be one of those life coaches, and now I'm like, no, not for any amount of money.
Yeah, life coach is another I have no experience with it. I know people that pretend to be life coaches and try to hawk those services for money, but I don't know. I shouldn't say pretend to be life coaches, are life coaches for other people, and I have no portend, and I have no idea how that sort of thing works. I'd be very suspicious of any. I think it's good with a men's group that there's no financial incentive for anybody.
Yeah,
right.
It's important.
Yeah,
because I know some people who do it, and I think their intentions are in the right place. But I gotta say that if you are so desperate for income that you have to hawk spiritual life coaching to people about how to be abundant in their life, you're probably not in a great position to be trying to teach people how to be abundant.
Don't get me started on that. Yeah.
And like I've been there, like I've been that person who would be doing that. So like I understand that the intention is sincere, but in most cases, I think, especially the ones who aren't actually doing it that well, I think their intentions tend to be more sincere. But as opposed to the ones who are making a lot of money, at some point they have to be like, well, I'm making a lot of money with this shtick, let's just keep it rolling.
Yeah.
But the actual experience to impart, I think, is lacking.
Yeah, and maybe there's something that could be gained from it. I don't think that the type of intimacy that we talked about trying to build can be gained from that. I asked my my friend who's done both a lot of therapy in his life and been part of several men's groups, what the difference has been, men and co-ed groups, what the difference has been. And he's like, well, yeah, the therapist is paid to listen to you. Like,
that's the difference.
You don't have, and you don't have anything to contribute to them. Like they're not going to ask you, and even if I had some sort of expertise that I could provide to my therapist, in order to keep, you need to keep the relationship one way for good reason.
It's a one-way relationship.
Yeah. And I think figuring out what my friend was saying has been powerful for him over the years is he gained more and more confidence steadily that he had something to offer other people, which he did not start out with. And then he made enough progress with the help of other people to say, oh, I actually have some things that I feel good about myself and the progress that I've made, and I can contribute that to other men. And he said that the older sort of patriarchs that are part of these groups that have been going on for a long time, it's just kind of expected that once you figure something out that's going on with you, that you give back. I think we have a natural human outlet for that, right? Isn't that, I think we covered some of that in episode 1 about why I've been, you've been wanting to do some of your art or writing or even the podcast. Is there's this impulse, once you have a certain amount of wisdom, you're just like, where does this go? Should I give this to anybody? So maybe it's a harder question for me since I don't have children. Like you have a direct like wisdom bucket to try to put your life experience into.
No, I hear that though. It's like I can say with some introspection that a lot of why I'd like to get more involved in raving, for example, I do enjoy going to loud parties and moving my, bones and organs in pleasing ways. But I definitely can say a lot of the reason that I want to get involved in that is because at this point, I feel like I'm older and have some experience that'd be worth passing on to that maybe I would have wanted when I was 18 to 25 and going to parties a lot. Kind of a wish to meet a younger version of me to pass on some of these things I've learned. It's definitely a known reason for why I'd want to get more involved with that.
Yeah. No, that just discovering that you have something to provide for other people and doing that. I think that there's this immense, I think this is something that your hardcore like capitalist economists tend to miss, is that people don't always need incentive in the normal way that we think about incentives to do things. I think we have natural if you're not a psychopath, you have natural altruistic impulses. And that's something I didn't expect to weigh on me so heavily in middle age, is this notion of like, oh, how do I start laying the groundwork for somebody else that might want to overcome the challenges that I do, which is probably why we survived as a social species. The fact that that's ingrained in us.
Yeah. Teasing apart that biological imperative from the whole lived experience thing. That is an episode of itself.
Yeah. And is there actually, because it's one of those things that feels very meaningful, if you want to put an existential spin on it, what could feel more meaningful than giving help to somebody else who's coming up behind you and giving them a hand up and making their experience going through something easier than yours? But also, maybe it's just our biology tricking us and it's just all meaningless nonsense to propagate the species.
What's the difference?
What's the difference? All right, man. Is there anything else you want to cover on this topic before we wrap her up?
No, that was good. Maybe just celebrate the fact that we've had a guest on the show who also happened to be named Ryan.
I know. So we should say that we had joked at first that with one of the things with the Ryan, and we hadn't been settled on it, one of the requirements to be a host or guest on the Ryan Angle was to be named Ryan, for no other reason than we thought it was funny, and maybe it could actually serve as a useful creative constraint versus the sort of constraint that would make things worse. But yeah, it just so happens that the guy who's just on, Ryan M, is named Ryan, and we met here, and he happened to have some experience with something that I definitely wanted to talk about. And then we've talked about having our friend Ryan Flynn on to talk about the experience of it. So we're both named Ryan. We're going to be 2 guests deep named Ryan. I don't know.
Let's be honest. At first, it wasn't a joke. And then we told it to your girlfriend and she thought it was stupid. And then we said, oh, maybe it was just a joke. And now that it's working up like that, maybe it wasn't a joke.
It feels
after
kind of an
all.
exclusionary, elitist thing, But there's also people I would like to have on, like Charlie Rohr, to talk about the game.
Yeah.
I lost the game.
We could just call him Ryan. Hey. Fine.
Or one thing I thought about was just having a Ryan interpreter. You have to have somebody sitting next to you that's your designated Ryan that you speak through and that we speak to.
So he's, hey Ryan, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's like a sign language interpreter. No, don't
Ryan
speak
language interpreter.
Don't speak me directly to me. Your name is not Ryan. Don't look me in the eye. In fact, turn your camera off and speak to the Ryan in which you are assigned.
Look at me.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap it for this episode of the Rye Angle. If you want the link to the 36 questions for increasing human closeness, I will put the link that Ryan M dropped in the video description on YouTube and in the show notes on the podcasting things. Those are really fun. I would encourage anybody who has the least bit of interest in it, go through it with your significant other. And I still think doing an episode where we go through those questions with each other would be really fun, just to give you a taste of what they are. So they're in sets 1, 2, 3, and there's like less, more, and greater, intimate, and would you like to be famous, or in what way? And then 2 is what roles do love and affection play in your life? And then you get down to 3, and it's of all the people in your family, whose death would you find most disturbing and why?
Yeah.
So it's a cool list to go over with your significant other, if nobody else, or good friends, or it's a hell of a thing to do on a first date. You just bust that out. You're like, let's see if we can go 0 to 1,000 really fast. And
when did you last sing to yourself or to someone else?
When did you last sing to? Wait, do you do this in your house? We do it all the time. I'll wake up and I'm just like, I'm making coffee. I'm a coffee guy.
Yeah.
Doing a coffee thing.
Doing
do.
I'm usually not ready to sing before I've already had the coffee, but other things, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. When did you last cry in front of another person and by yourself? Like, that's a bit. You could be like, I cried because I was remembering deep regrets from a time that I did something terrible and illegal and it hurt someone. Then I can't talk about, like, that's a big fucking question. Not
to extend the show too much, but I'm going to answer that one. So I remember about 10 years ago, my son had recently been born and we were living at my parents' house, and I found a baby bird outside in a bush, I think it was, and I picked it up. And I was holding it, and it was the most precious thing in the world. And I dropped it, and it died.
Oh no!
And I lost my shit.
How old are you?
26.
26. You dropped it. You dropped a baby bird, and it died. And you obviously made emotional impact. It was like the first thing that came to your mind.
Oh man, yeah, that was bad. I lost it, man. My wife came out and was like, what happened?
Man, I'm trying to think if I have ever unintentionally killed something more significant than an insect. Deer hit a bit. Oh, yeah, I hit a baby. God damn it. This is getting so depressing. I hit a baby deer once with its mother there, and it was making the worst noises ever. And it was the worst thing. But I didn't cry because I'm a fucking man.
Just go to get fucked, baby deer.
I need to get off this podcast because I'm gonna go drink half a bottle of Jack and go
masturbate.
That's not a manly thing. I love that.
Oh, I mean, have sex with someone else.
I mean, I'm about to go jack off. God damn it. I'm sorry for anybody who made it this far.
You can blame me.
We've learned nothing and have made absolutely no progress with emotional intelligence.
This is the Rye Angle.
This is the Rye Angle. So long.
Thank you for listening to the Ryangle Podcast. Our music is by Tallac, Tallac. For more by Tallac, visit soundcloud.com/Tallac.